The Xipherian Dominion had ruled the stars for nearly 1,000 years. Their empire stretched across entire sectors, their fleets darkening the skies of 1,000 conquered worlds. Theirs was an order built upon superiority, biological, technological, and intellectual. No species had ever withstood their conquests for long. The weak surrendered. The strong resisted for a time, but in the end, they all broke. That was the way of things. High Marshal Kyrex stood at the command deck of the dreadnought Vaylor's Wrath, his obsidian eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. The star chart pulsed with the faint glow of a newly discovered system. Sol. A backwater cluster of planets orbiting a modest yellow star. The species that inhabited the third planet called themselves humans. Kyrex barely contained his disdain. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a species wholly unremarkable. Their biology was frail, soft flesh encasing brittle bones. Their technology, while progressing at a surprising rate, was still leagues behind the Dominion's war machines. They lacked genetic enhancements, cybernetic augmentations, or even psionic abilities. As far as Kyrex was concerned, they were another insignificant species to be assimilated or exterminated. "Show me their military capacity," he commanded. The hologram shifted, displaying fleets of primitive metal ships. Their hulls were constructed from crude alloys, their weapons reliant on basic kinetic and energy-based armaments. On the ground, their forces relied on massed infantry and mechanized divisions, machines with wheels and treads, like something out of the Dominion's ancient history archives. It was almost amusing. General Viren, a lean Xipherian with a gleaming carapace and an air of practiced arrogance, scoffed. Their fleet would be eradicated before they even realized they were under attack. Their soldiers? It would be more efficient to burn their cities from orbit than to waste time fighting them. A ripple of laughter passed through the gathered officers. Kyrex, however, remained silent, his gaze unreadable. "Resistance is to be expected," said another officer, a strategist named Zeltra. "The last species we conquered fought back, but they lasted no more than 2 weeks before their leadership capitulated. I predict humans will hold out for a similar length of time. Perhaps a month if they are particularly stubborn." Kyrex turned his attention to the screen once more. The humans had fought among themselves for millennia, waging wars that, while technologically primitive, were nothing short of brutal. Perhaps their savagery would make them interesting opponents for a short while. Still, there was no question of the outcome. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We will offer them the choice of surrender. If they refuse, we will demonstrate why no species stands against the Dominion and survives." The first communication was received by the humans 2 weeks later. A shimmering projection of High Marshal Kyrex appeared before the representatives of Earth's governing bodies. The humans had united under a coalition, a desperate alliance forged in the face of imminent annihilation. Their leaders stood in a dimly lit chamber, staring at the towering form of the Xipherian warlord. "This is High Marshal Kyrex of the Xipherian Dominion," he declared. His voice, though smooth and precise, carried an undercurrent of finality. "Your species has been deemed unfit for independent existence. You will surrender your planet, your fleets, and your people to the rule of the Dominion. Resist, and you will be eradicated." The room fell into silence. The human leaders exchanged glances. A man with streaks of gray in his dark hair stepped forward, General Elias Carter, one of Earth's foremost military strategists. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled Kyrex. "You expect us to just kneel?" Carter asked, his voice even. "To let you march onto our world and take everything we've built?" Kyrex allowed a thin smirk. "We expect you to recognize the futility of resistance. Your species is biologically and technologically inferior. There is no victory for you." A woman, President Aisha Marquez, folded her arms. "We've fought wars before. You'll find we're not as weak as you seem to think." The Xipherian officers observing the exchange chuckled among themselves. Kyrex, however, simply tilted his head. The human's bravado was almost admirable. "Almost. Your wars were fought against yourselves," he said coldly. "A conflict between insects changes nothing when faced with a boot that will crush them." General Carter took a step closer to the projection. "We're not insects. And you have no idea what you're walking into." Kyrex's expression darkened. The arrogance of these creatures was almost insulting. He had offered them a merciful alternative: surrender with dignity. Instead, they clung to their pride, refusing to accept their place in the natural order. "Very well," he said at last. "If you will not bow, you will burn." The transmission cut. Across the Dominion's fleet, orders were issued. Weapons primed. Invasion plans finalized. The campaign would begin at dawn. From orbit, Earth looked peaceful. A blue jewel suspended in the void, its continents shrouded in swirling white clouds. It was almost a shame. Kyrex stood aboard the command deck of his flagship, overseeing the final preparations. "Deploy the first wave," he ordered. "Let's see how long their bravado lasts." The Dominion ships descended through the atmosphere, sleek metallic behemoths cutting through the sky. Thousands of Xipherian soldiers deployed onto the surface, their armor gleaming under the sun. The invasion had begun. The first battle took place on the outskirts of what the humans called New Berlin. Xipherian forces advanced with disciplined precision, expecting swift and immediate surrender. Instead, they were met with something unexpected. Gunfire, explosions, and something else. The humans did not run. They fought. The Xipherians, trained for overwhelming firepower and swift domination, found themselves locked in brutal engagements. Human soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, did not break under pressure. They adapted. They countered. They struck hard and retreated before the Xipherians could react. Kyrex watched the battle unfold from his command center. His expression remained impassive, but his fingers tightened behind his back. The humans should have been crushed already. And yet, they continued to fight. It was not just that they resisted. Many species had resisted before. But there was something different here. Something unsettling. They fought as if they did not fear death. They fought as if they enjoyed it. Kyrex's gaze narrowed. Perhaps these creatures were not as weak as they seemed. Perhaps, for the first time in centuries, the Dominion had made a mistake. The first wave should have been decisive. That was how every conquest before had gone. The Xipherian Dominion did not engage in prolonged wars. They struck hard, fast, and without hesitation. Their forces descended upon planets like an unrelenting storm, overwhelming resistance before it had a chance to form. No species had ever stood against them for long. Yet here, on this backwater world, the storm had met something unyielding. High Marshal Kyrex stood rigid on the bridge of his flagship, Valer's Wrath, his expression carefully composed as he watched the battlefield unfold across the holographic display. The first landing zones had been established with ease. Their firepower had carved through human defenses in the opening hours. Cities burned, their primitive war machines lay in ruins, and thousands of human troops had fallen. By all logic, by all precedent, the war should already be over. But it wasn't. Human soldiers did not flee. They did not crumble under superior technology or overwhelming force. They dug in. They regrouped. They counterattacked. And they did it with a brutality that unnerved even the hardened warriors of the Dominion. Reports filtered in from the surface, each one more troubling than the last. Entire Xipherian strike teams wiped out in ambushes. Supply convoys disappearing into dense urban zones, never to be heard from again. High-energy plasma rounds bouncing off reinforced barricades, returned tenfold by human artillery. The humans had adapted faster than any species Kyrex had encountered. "They're unpredictable," General Viren muttered beside him, his mandibles clicking in irritation as he analyzed the latest battle reports. "Their strategies don't follow any logical pattern. We crushed their initial defenses, but instead of surrendering, they spread out, hit us from unexpected angles, and vanish before we can retaliate. Like animals fighting with their backs against a wall," another officer scoffed. Kyrex was not so sure. He had seen species fight out of desperation before, but this was something else. The humans did not just fight to survive. They fought to win. A message came through from the surface, live footage from the front lines. A Dominion squad had cornered a human unit in the ruins of one of their cities. The Xipherians outnumbered them 3-1. The humans should have surrendered. Instead, they grinned. One of them, his face bloodied, his armor dented, locked eyes with the squad leader and said something in his guttural language. Then, before the Xipherians could react, the humans attacked. There was no hesitation, no fear. They fought with a savagery that defied all logic, using everything at their disposal: rifles, blades, their own fists when necessary. One of them tackled a Dominion soldier, driving a knife between the plates of his armor, twisting the blade with practiced efficiency. Another wrenched a plasma weapon from a dying Xipherian and turned it against its former wielder. Kyrex watched in silence as his elite soldiers, trained for planetary subjugation, fell beneath the unrelenting fury of these so-called primitives. The last human standing was riddled with plasma fire, yet he still lunged forward, taking one final enemy down with him. The screen went black. The bridge was silent. General Viren's mandibles twitched. They should be surrendering. They should be terrified. "They're human," Kyrex said at last, his voice quiet but firm. "And we underestimated them." The realization settled over the room like a shadow. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion was not facing an enemy that could be cowed by superior force alone. They were facing something far more dangerous, something they did not fully understand. Kyrex turned to his officers. "Deploy additional forces. I want heavier armor, more aerial support. Increase orbital bombardments on key resistance zones. If they refuse to be crushed underfoot, then we will grind them to dust." The orders were carried out immediately. The Dominion's forces redoubled their assault. Where before they had sought swift conquest, now they aimed for total annihilation. But even as Xipherian warships rained fire upon Earth's surface, even as entire districts were reduced to smoldering ruins, the resistance did not weaken. If anything, it grew stronger. Kyrex received a report from the Eastern Front. Human forces had taken out an entire Dominion battalion in the mountains, using explosives to trigger an avalanche that buried Xipherian armor units beneath tons of rock and ice. Another report came from the shattered remains of a human city. Dominion forces had pushed through the ruins, only to find themselves surrounded. Human snipers picked off their officers with deadly precision, while infantry units emerged from underground tunnels, striking hard and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The humans did not fight like any species the Dominion had encountered before. They did not rely on superior strength or advanced weaponry. They relied on something else, something far more dangerous. They adapted. Kyrex watched another battlefield feed, this time from the forests outside one of the human strongholds. Xipherian war machines rolled forward, their energy cannons primed to wipe out the last of the human defenders. But before they could fire, the ground beneath them erupted in a series of violent explosions. Entire vehicles vanished into craters, swallowed by carefully placed mines. Human soldiers swarmed from the tree-line, attacking from multiple directions at once. Kyrex narrowed his eyes. They were learning. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting the art of planetary conquest. They had fought countless wars. They had crushed countless civilizations. And yet, in a matter of days, these humans had learned how to fight them. General Viren stepped forward, clearly uneasy. "High Marshal, we may need to consider." "We are not retreating," Kyrex cut in sharply. "But—" Kyrex turned to face him, his gaze like cold steel. "We are the Dominion. We do not retreat." Viren hesitated, then nodded. But Kyrex saw the doubt in his eyes. He saw it in the eyes of many of his officers. And for the first time since the war began, Kyrex felt something he had never felt before. A sliver of uncertainty. The humans had been underestimated. That mistake would not be made again. The full force of the Dominion would be brought upon them. Their planet would be broken. Their people would be crushed. Yet as he turned back to the display, watching as another Dominion strike team fell to human ambushes, he could not shake the thought that had begun to creep into his mind. What if brute force was not enough? What if the humans were not just another species to be conquered? What if, for the first time in centuries, the Dominion had met an enemy it could not defeat? Kyrex stood motionless on the bridge of Valor's Wrath, watching as another battlefield transmission flickered across the main display. A Dominion outpost had been overrun in the Northern Hemisphere, its defenders wiped out to the last soldier. The recording showed the aftermath: Xipherian bodies scattered among the ruins, their armor torn open, weapons stripped from their hands. There were no prisoners. There were never any prisoners. The humans were relentless. For every stronghold the Dominion destroyed, another resistance cell emerged. Every time the Xipherians adapted their tactics, the humans countered with something new, something unpredictable, something brutal. Kyrex had fought countless wars, but never had he faced an enemy so stubborn. A transmission request blinked onto the display. One of his field commanders. Kyrex gestured for the link to open. The face of Colonel Zeltra appeared, her normally pristine carapace now scratched and scorched from battle. The faint hum of blaster fire echoed in the background. "Hi, Marshal," she said, her voice strained. They don't stop." Kyrex's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Zeltra hesitated, then turned her screen to show the battlefield behind her. Dominion soldiers were retreating in disarray, their formations broken. From the smoke and debris, human warriors surged forward, pressing the attack. Their armor was battered, their weapons scavenged from fallen Xipherians, yet they fought with a ferocity that made no sense. Some of them had wounds that should have been fatal, yet they kept going. "We hit them with everything," Zeltra continued, panting. "Orbital bombardments, chemical agents, even psychological warfare. Nothing works. They don't stop fighting. Even when they should be dead, they keep coming." A sudden explosion rocked the feed, cutting the transmission. The link flickered for a moment before going dark. Kyrex clenched his jaw. The Dominion did not lose wars. Yet here, against a species deemed weak, they were being bled dry. A cold voice cut through his thoughts. "They are not like the others." Kyrex turned to see General Viren watching him intently. The arrogance that had once defined the Xipherian officer was gone, replaced by something else, something dangerously close to fear. "They should be surrendering," Viren continued. "We have crushed their cities. We have wiped out entire divisions. Yet they fight as if none of it matters." Kyrex remained silent, his gaze drifting back to the war reports. Casualty rates among Dominion forces were rising at an alarming rate. More Xipherian soldiers had died in this campaign than in the last 10 planetary conquests combined. He exhaled slowly. "They are not just fighting for survival." Viren's mandibles twitched. "Then what are they fighting for?" Kyrex turned from the display, stepping toward the viewport. Earth loomed below, wreathed in smoke and fire. And yet, despite the devastation, despite the overwhelming force the Dominion had unleashed, the humans still resisted. It was not desperation. It was not blind defiance. It was something else. "They are fighting," Kyrex said, his voice low, "because they choose to." He had seen species fight when forced into a corner. He had watched civilizations throw themselves against the Dominion's might in a last, hopeless struggle. But humans did not fight like the defeated. They fought like predators who had only just realized what they were capable of. A new transmission came through, this one from a Dominion scout ship patrolling the outskirts of the system. The officer on screen looked shaken. "Hi, Marshal," the scout reported. "We have intercepted human communications. They are different from what we expected." Kyrex's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The officer hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. Then, with a few keystrokes, he transmitted an audio recording. The bridge filled with the sound of human voices. At first, it seemed like ordinary battlefield chatter, troop movements, supply requests, casualty reports. But beneath it, there was something else. Something eerie. Laughter. Kyrex's brow furrowed. "Are they celebrating?" The officer's mandibles twitched. "Not exactly. It's something they call gallows humor. Even as they die, they joke about it. They mock us. They mock death itself." Kyrex listened to the recording again, and now he heard it more clearly. Human soldiers laughing amidst the chaos, making grim jokes about their own odds. One voice stood out, crackling over the comms. "They think we're weak? That's cute. Let's show them how weak we are." Another responded. "First one to take down a commander gets free drinks when this is over." It was madness. No species reacted this way to war. No species embraced it. General Viren took a cautious step forward. "High Marshal, if we continue this campaign, we may not just lose this planet. We may be facing something far worse." Kyrex turned sharply. "Worse?" Viren hesitated, then exhaled. "A species that refuses to surrender. A species that grows stronger the more we fight them. What happens if they survive this war? What happens if they take this fight beyond their world?" For the first time, Kyrex considered the unthinkable. What if they had not found a planet to conquer? What if they had awoken a force that would one day hunt them? The thought sent a ripple of unease through him. The Xipherian Dominion had always believed themselves invincible. But for the first time, doubt crept into the edges of that certainty. Perhaps the humans were not the ones being conquered. Perhaps they were merely learning how to win. Kyrex had seen defeat before. He had watched enemy forces crumble, seen entire civilizations ground to dust beneath the might of the Dominion. But this was different. This was not an enemy being crushed. This was an enemy evolving. The battlefield reports were grim. The human resistance had not just survived, it had escalated. They had begun striking beyond their territories, launching coordinated assaults on Xipherian supply lines and command centers. They had learned how to disable Dominion weaponry, how to turn captured technology against them. What should have been an overwhelming planetary conquest had become something far worse. A war of attrition. And the Dominion was losing. The bridge of Vaylor's Wrath was eerily silent. The officers gathered around the main display, their expressions grim. General Viren stood beside Kyrex, his mandibles tight with barely restrained anxiety. "Our troops are reporting mass casualties. Several battalions have gone dark in the last rotation. The humans, they are not fighting like a desperate people anymore. They are fighting like a species that knows it can win," Kyrex finished. Viren didn't deny it. He simply looked at the screen, where the latest report had come through. Human forces had ambushed another Dominion garrison, wiping it out in under an hour. The recording showed them moving with practiced efficiency, their strategies no longer erratic but precise, disciplined. They had learned. Kyrex turned away, pacing to the viewport. Earth hung below, wreathed in fire and smoke. But it was not a broken world. It was a forged one. Every city burned had only hardened its defenders. Every loss suffered had only made them more ruthless. The Dominion had come to shatter them, but instead, the humans had become something else. Something stronger. A sudden alert flashed across the command console. A fleet-wide transmission. Kyrex gestured for it to be played. The image that flickered to life was not from one of his own commanders. It was human. A soldier stood in the center of the screen, clad in battered armor. Blood streaked his face. Whether his own or another's, it was impossible to tell. Behind him, human troops moved with quiet efficiency, preparing weapons, checking their gear. There was no desperation in their eyes. Only grim determination. The soldier spoke. The Dominion's translators processed the words instantly. "You came here thinking we were weak, that we would roll over like all the others. You thought your ships, your weapons, your empire would break us." He exhaled, shaking his head. "You were wrong." The camera panned slightly, showing the ruined landscape behind him. And then, to Kyrex's astonishment, it turned upward, toward Vaylor's Wrath, toward the entire Dominion fleet hanging in orbit. The soldier was staring right at him. "You still have a choice," he continued. "Leave. Because if you don't, we won't just survive this war." His eyes, dark and unyielding, bored into the screen. "We'll end it. And then we'll come for you." The transmission cut out. Silence fell over the bridge. Kyrex remained still, but something cold settled in his chest. This was not arrogance. It was not a bluff. It was inevitable. The Dominion had come to conquer a primitive species. Instead, they had forged a monster. He turned back to his officers, his voice low. "Order the retreat." Viren stiffened. "High Marshal, order the retreat." There was no argument. No further protest. The officers moved to comply, transmitting the command across the fleet. One by one, Dominion warships disengaged from the battle, pulling away from Earth's gravity well. Troops on the ground received their extraction orders, scrambling for evacuation points. Some would not make it. Many had already fallen. Kyrex watched as the planet shrank in the viewport, as the humans, those impossible, unrelenting beings, stood victorious. They had survived. And now the Dominion had something it had never known before. A predator in the dark, watching, waiting. The war was over. But Kyrex knew, with chilling certainty, that this was not the end. It was only the beginning.